Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Birth New Earth podcast. I'm your host, Alana Light, and I am on a mission to remind humanity that we all have the power to co-create a new earth, which means that we can consciously come together. We can work together to be able to transcend the limiting systems and the beliefs that are no longer aligned with us so that we can create the kind of world that we really want to live in. But in order to do so, that takes us taking a step back and getting really honest where all of those limiting systems came from. And that's why it gives me such great pleasure to be able to introduce to you my next guest, Onawa Haynes, who has dedicated her career to clawing back the resources that have been taken from the Indigenous people who were here before we all got here. Because if we don't remember and honor and bring to the surface all of the pain, all of the cruelty, all of the injustice that came about in forming our country and the systems that we want to transcend right now, then we will never be able to come together to co-create the kind of earth that we all want to live in with systems that are rooted in harmony, love, balance, joy, abundance, and peace. So join me now in welcoming Onawa. Welcome, Onawa Haynes. And this is what I thought. I might get wrong, but is it Danae?
Danae. Yep.
Danae, so close. Okay.
So close.
And then Mescalero Apache. You are a lawyer, you are a runner, dedicated mother whose work is deeply rooted in empowering tribal communities. You're a founder and CEO of the Hozingo Consulting company. You have secured over $40 million. I can't even believe as I'm reading that in grant funding. And you've been doing this since 2015 for more than 25 Native tribes, nonprofits, small businesses supporting key programs like tribal law enforcement, education, behavioral health, and victim services. So your outrageous service recently won you a nomination for Forbes Entrepreneur of Impact, which I have already voted for you. We're going to put a link in the below so everyone can vote for you because you need to be winning this.
You.
You are a proud Navajo woman. Onawa blends cultural understanding with legal expertise, which is so critical now. And what you're strategically doing is really you're advocating for your clients' needs. You're ensuring that their voices are heard and that their priorities are respected. You have a Juris Doctor from the University of New Mexico. You're a member of the New Mexico Bar Association, and you're seamlessly bridging law, grant writing, and economic development to foster sustainability and self-determination for Native communities. So welcome, Onawa, to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest here.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I think I need that kind of reminder every morning of the things that I have the honor of carrying with me from day to day. And so thank you for that. It's very empowering to
Everyone
be able to
says
kind of
that. Everyone is
very
like, I forgot all the things I've done.
and it's great to hear it back and not
Yes.
feel exhausted by it all, just feel empowered. So thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm really grateful to be here.
Yeah, and I didn't even add in your whole like I mean this to me is like one of the most coolest things of being like, Miss New Mexico, USA and Miss Indian World. Like you forgot that part, right? Like you've done all of these things, and yet here you are kind of heads down, like dedicating service work to clawing back these resources for tribal communities. So like how did you come to do that? Was your heritage, kind of like interwoven in that decision?
Well, it's interesting, when we're talking about my journey through pageantry, and I always say that it's so different. I have such a different story from many people who are going into the pageant world.
Mhm.
Native American pageantry is based on I call them cultural pageants. And I will tell you, when I was 18 years old, so I grew up in Gallup, New Mexico, border town to my homelands on the Navajo Nation. And I didn't really grow up, with a strong sense of my culture, my language, especially. And that was through no fault of, my mom or my grandmother or great grandmothers. There was some boarding school experiences there. My mom, she also finished school in California. She was a part of the Mormon placement program. So she lived with a Mormon family in California so that she could continue her education. Um, and so I just had this epiphany when I was 18 years old. I woke up one day and I can see it clear as day. It's not just a story that I tell, but I can actually remember it happening. I woke up and I was thinking to myself, I've always felt so deeply and passionately about being a mother. I've always wanted to be a mom. And I thought to myself, one day when I have kids, I will not be able to teach them about who we are as
Mhm.
Navajo people. And so the way that I went about learning my culture was putting myself on stage. I ran for the Miss Intertribal Indian Ceremonial Pageant in Gallup. It's actually an event that's been going on for over 100 years. I remember growing up and seeing the ceremonial queen in the parades and all of that, and it never really was something that was stood out to me until that moment. I was like, if I go about it through pageantry, I'll have to learn how to introduce myself in my language. I'll have to learn my clanship relationships. I'll have to learn how to dress myself in my traditional clothing. And I'll just have to build community, not only with Navajo people, but folks from surrounding tribal communities. And, this is the way that I'm going to learn. And so it
Wow.
was interesting. Yeah, it was
That's so
interesting because
fascinating that through pageantry, that is how you learn about and like your deeply rooted Indigenous culture. Like you would never think that.
oh, no. And it was so interesting because it was a moment of revitalization of our culture and language for my family as well, because my mom also had to learn how to make traditional clothes. We all had to learn how to wrap my moccasins and tie up our hair. And I remember coming home I think I was at work or something. I came home and I walked in my front door and all I could hear was, and it was my mom and my grandma in my mom's sunroom where she would sew, and they had the sewing machines going and they were making clothes for me
Oh my
so
God.
that I could participate in this pageant.
I love that
And
so much.
it's been just such a journey for especially the women in my family to just be surrounded by
Wow.
them and just
And
have
they
these
had
things.
never done that, right? That was like new for them.
That was a new experience. My mom,
Wow.
she tried to adapt I think it's McCall's pattern so
Wow.
that she could kind of just have the outline of our traditional clothes. And yeah, long story short there, I came in last place, but
Oh,
at that moment, I
didn't
learned
win.
a lot,
Didn't
didn't win, but at that moment I said, you know what? I'm never going to lose. That was the competitive side in me. I said, I'm never going to lose a pageant again. And I didn't until I went to Miss USA, which is,
Wow.
a whole other story.
I got chills everywhere. That's why you have that kind of bio. You're like, I will never not win again. That's
And
that's what's happening. Wow.
it was something
Wow.
that, was such an outlet for me, something that, really kept me motivated, really kept me
Mhm.
grounded in my community and my identity as a Navajo woman. And every now and then I kind of go back and just kind of think about how, honored and blessed I am to have that in my life. And I think the perception of pageantry from the outside can sometimes be, oh, it's just kind of this hokey thing. And it's like,
Right.
no, it really was something that I really enjoyed and something that really gave me such a solid foundation in my culture and who I am and what's important to me, and really just kind of kept me on the right path.
Wow. That's such a cool story. And yeah, it does like have that. kind of like a stigma to it, where like you just never think that someone has that opportunity to get like so much more rooted into where it is that they've come from only through this kind of experience, but we're able to do that. Is that kind of like what led you at some point to say, because I know that you had a stint in corporate, like I have, like so many of us have, and at some point, I know in kind of the prep call, we talked about, what really is filling us up, what kind of mark do we want to leave, into the world, and be able to see that we've created some kind of a change. And I think for you, it was kind of underlying there. What had caused you to actually take that leap? Because I know we talked about that being a big leap as well.
Um, the leap from corporate into what I do today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really just, I really go back to, some folks will call it your intuition. A lot of
Mm,
cultures, the way that I identify it is just kind of the spirits around you that are helping you, guide you through life. And I've always had such a strong sense of, just really listening to that. And I, instead of kind of, shooing it away to say, oh, I'm just stressed, oh, I just got to get through this
yeah.
hard period, it really was just listening to this is not the right place for me. And knowing that with all that I had accomplished and all of the accolades that I have and just my abilities and those things weren't being honored in the spaces that I was in.
Mm.
And I remember, having I was able to have a meeting at some point where there were native languages spoken in a Zoom setting. And I was like, I just remember that experience carrying me through the day because that wasn't part of my day to day at that point.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, I felt so full that day and so
Mm.
happy and joyful to just get hear our languages spoken on a Zoom call.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, the place that I'm meant to be is, through all of the journeys that I had been on, I was, worked for a tribal government, I was public defender, and then got into grant writing and was working for a nonprofit,
Right.
different nonprofit. And I was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
everything had led up to that
Yeah.
moment where I just said, it's time for me
Yeah.
to really harness like what all of these experiences have brought me to. And it was a day in March 2022, and I said, I am going to go step back into our communities, take everything that I've learned, and kind of make myself useful again to bringing that critical funding to our communities and do something that feels joyful and also has had incredible impact on the communities that we work with.
Yeah, I can't even get over like the change that you've created. And I read one of the articles on your site. There's money available, right? And just like no one knows about it, and no one knows how to access it. And then it gets like actually lost. Like if it's not claimed. And so can you go a little bit more into that? Because I feel like that is like the biggest piece of education that everyone is missing right now. And what do you do about that?
Right. And this conversation is so timely because we just had a crisis on our hands as far as the pause on federal grant funding yesterday.
Wow.
And so, for the past, I would say that's been maybe 5, 6 years. I had been carrying this little dream in my heart that, having worked for a tech nonprofit, just and being able to see the power of technology and how we can just solve a lot of problems and issues that we're facing, I was like, one of the things for tribal communities that we face is that while there are billions and billions of dollars in federal grants and aid, which is an uncertain situation right now, but in 2023, private philanthropy, um, they gave out $557 billion in grant funding.
Mm.
And tribal communities receive less than 1% of
Oh my
philanthropic
God.
dollars.
Oh my God.
And
That's
so,
terrible.
and there's a number of issues that we see there. One is,
Wow.
there was no centralized database for folks to be able to go to find these grant opportunities. And
Mm.
so having worked in tech, I was like, there's got to be a solution here. And
Right.
so
Right.
very serendipitously, I was able to connect with a major philanthropic organization who just had heard my kind of left field conversation about how we could solve that problem. It's not about teaching people how to grant write. It's, showing them how to find the grants in the first place.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And so, without getting into the weeds too much, we've developed the Tribal Funding Registry, and this is through my nonprofit work at the Hozingo Institute. And we're consolidating, it's a free grants database for tribes and Native-led nonprofits,
Wow.
and it consolidates grant opportunities across all sectors, federal, state, foundation, corporate opportunities, so that we have one centralized place to find them. Because in the past, I always call it the forwarded email. Someone would forward me an
Right.
email that had been forwarded 9 times before. By the time it gets to me, there's 2 weeks before the deadline, and everyone's just
Mm.
kind of scrambling.
Right. Right.
And it was very reactive. And we're hoping that, now we can present the information to people in real time, giving them
Wow.
as much information as possible, creating dual visibility for both our communities and philanthropy, introducing them to each other so that
Yeah.
we can make a change and change that less than 1% statistic. And I'll
Wow.
say
I can't
yesterday
believe that number.
yeah,
Like, I'm sorry. I'm like, what?
yes.
Wow.
And yesterday in our day of crisis where it was just basically, so many federally funded programs in tribal communities were just,
Mhm.
it's like the rug was pulled out from under them. It made our work at the Hozingo Institute more important than ever because we were able to, put together an emergency communication in our newsletter to say, just be this voice of hope, to give that number to folks and say, we are committed to helping you uncover, you know, alternative funding out there. $557 billion is wild. And it's time that our communities, have visibility
Yeah.
and have access to that funding. And that's, one of our missions. And we're standing right alongside our communities in this work.
Wow.
So, yeah,
Wow.
the tool will launch in March 2025. So we're just almost a month
Wow.
away, and we're really, really excited about it.
That's incredible. I love that you're like, I'm a tech person too. So I know we can do something about that. And that's just it. Like it's like making those kinds of connections. How do we streamline it? How do we automate it so that nothing is lost, no time is lost, and we can advocate as quickly as possible. And it's so powerful. And I mean, when you tell me about that 1% number, it enrages me because like it goes back to the beginning of the conversation because we've basically siphoned away all of the land, the resources, the culture of the people that were living here before we all arrived. And how is it that like 1% is an okay number to say, well, that's what we're giving back right now? Like what do we need to do like at like a societal corporate government level, like what do we need to do to make bigger the importance of clawing back resources to Indigenous people? Like like what are the steps that we take? I'm like in what are we
Yes,
right now?
it's a wild statistic because, you think about my home community, 30% of people on the Navajo Nation have access to running water in their homes. And for less than 1% of philanthropic dollars going to tribal communities, it is just like there's such a gap there. And
Wait,
I
can you
think,
repeat? Wait, are you saying that only 30% of, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
no, that's okay.
Only 30% of people have access to running water that are like
On
in these
on the
in these
Navajo Nation,
I
who
can't
live
even
on the
believe
Navajo Nation.
in America, like in this country.
Yes, in this country, on the Navajo Nation, only
I can't.
30% of folks, yeah, have running water. So I use that statistic a lot because
Wow.
it is just, it's mind blowing and it is infuriating, you know. Um, and I think one of the most profound things that we find is really listening to Indigenous voices
Mhm.
and letting our communities tell you what they need and being responsive to that. Elevating our voices, you know, giving, pulling out a chair for us at the table, facilitating, for us to have a seat at the table. I think now more than ever, that's what we need to be doing for one another, especially. But elevating Native voices, believing Native people about their own experiences within their own communities and trusting the expertise that we have about our own communities. Um, and I think that is one of the things that has been so important about this work with the Tribal Funding Registry for the Hozingo Institute is that it is Native led. We have a whole team of Native grant subject matter experts or folks who have worked with Native communities for a number of years. And so we're informing this tech tool so that it's not just the technology. You've got real
Mm.
expertise, real human expertise, having eyes on how this tool is being built and the machine learning and all of that. So,
Wow.
um, yeah, elevating Native voices,
Wow.
facilitating seats at the table and, really advocating. I mean, right now, the conversation, again, is so timely because we've just had these massive wildfires in LA.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as Indigenous caretakers of the land, it was like, Indigenous caretaking in California was banned, was outlawed completely. And
I
so,
can't, that was outlawed.
yes,
That's what happens.
absolutely.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow.
And it was
Wow.
outlawed, some number of years ago. And so now we see these effects of, improper stewardship of the land.
Right.
And
Right.
and it's always one of those things where, until it hits close to home, a lot of people just kind of, don't really pay attention. And there are organizations who are really trying to um, take back and re-implement the Indigenous stewardship practices
Yes.
because we can see how destructive they can be. So that's where I think believing in the expertise and really trusting the expertise of Indigenous people about our communities and land stewardship and having autonomy over our own bodies and experiences. There's so many things that
Oh,
impact our communities and our
so much.
people
Yeah.
that yeah, it really is almost as simple as just listening to us.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is. And I think that that's kind of the root of where this kind of discord started when our country first began, where, folks came in that thought they knew better and didn't listen to the people that were so close to the land, that were giving back to the land and also receiving from the land. And there's such a deep wisdom to be revered and respected and carried with that. Because of that, Earth would survive and thrive. And I love that you have brought up, that there was a potentiality for us to have been able to prevent the wildfires if we only had in place listening, right, prior.
Mm.
And so can you go a little bit more into that? Like what are some of the ways that if we were still true stewards of the land to be able to not only just steward earth but also ourselves, what could we have done?
So, while I'm not the expert on land stewardship, I will say that one
Not
of the
yet,
things
right?
that, not yet,
Next week, right?
there are other folks who are far more educated and who have, grown up with these traditional ways than I have. But I know that the practice of the words that I've heard them be characterized as is friendly fires. It's those
Mm,
controlled burns,
mm,
making sure that, in a lot of Indigenous communities, we have, a certain calendar of events that happens, and interrupting that calendar of events, so to speak. And I hate to westernize it, but certain things happen during certain seasons, certain
Yeah.
times of the year, and so interrupting those cycles and those practices um, can be catastrophic. But really just having the ability to implement those friendly fires once again. And,
Right.
having, also being able to sit with folks who, city officials, county officials, state
Right.
officials who are, kind of the lawmakers or who are creating policies around these things. Again, having a seat at the table to
Right.
have our voices heard and be able to give input on how these different practices can be implemented into, our modern day society. And I think as far as personal wellness goes, there's so much there, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I remember one of the conversations being heard, being one of the conversations that I had heard. Again, this was on social media, but someone was saying, why was there no water in the fire hydrants in LA? It's because they cut off water from the river upstream because the tribes upstream wanted to protect, salmon spawning. And it was just like, all of this weight being it's like, no, if we're going to talk about tribal communities, let's talk about the indigenous practices that were outlawed. Like, let's roll the
It's
tapes all the way
yeah,
back,
all the way
all the way
back.
back.
Yeah, not just to roll it to say no, we can do it just to point a finger. And like there is like an ebb and flow every single month, every single season, which our Mother Earth is, kind of like breathing a certain way, is vibrating a certain way. And like there are practices that go along with all of that in order to be able to live with the harmony that is created by being able to know that, this is all just a large system that connects us, right? And we're not meant to come in and be separate from the earth. And outlawing like the stewardship of the earth is really, I mean, this is like insane. Like I can't believe that you've said that and that's even a real thing. But that's where we've gotten lost, I think, as a world, right? Because there's now been a clear delineation of people from Earth who are completely disconnected from themselves as a result, right? Because here we are, like we're sitting in like homes that, are keeping us from feeling earth, right? We
Mhm.
just drive on roads, again, like kind of like isolating ourselves from even our neighbors because we're always just trying to, kind of like acquire things, like more things, because we always just think that it's the things that are going to give us the peace and the joy, when in actuality, it's when we're living in community with one another and we're working together and we have close connection with Earth, that all of those healing properties that we need right now to get past the anxiety and the depression and the fighting and the war that we're living through all starts to go away. And that's what angers me the most, because that was the way of life of Indigenous people prior to anyone getting here. And when they arrived, all of the Indigenous folks, and I learned this when I first spoke to you, the Lenapes were welcoming everyone here in Staten Island. There were thousands of them, living all along the beach for 8,000 years, right? And they welcomed the Europeans. They said, this land belongs to everyone and no one. So you can come. We have more than enough room for everyone. It feels better to work together than to not. And we're going to show you how to work the land, right? And the Europeans were like, okay, sign this piece of paper. And what we'll tell you on this piece of paper is that we're just going to be here temporarily. We're going to just like coexist with you, and this will be like a rental agreement. Happily signed it, not knowing they just signed away their land. And all those people were left ignored. I thought they were all killed by the Europeans, but no, they caught influenza and all the other like European diseases that they weren't able to treat. And those folks all died. And what used to be thousands of people on this land was just two big houses, and it still is today. And I feel like that's where our capitalistic kind of like system was born, because that became the way of being.
Right. Yeah, I think, there are plenty of Native communities, in existence today. I think about our Pueblo relatives in the Southwest, where their communities, they have different, so their clanship system basically is like, every clan has a responsibility to the community, whether it's,
Mhm.
you folks are in charge of, agriculture, and you folks are in charge of hunting, and you folks, and that creates that sense of community responsibility to one
Yeah.
another. And one of the words that you said was capitalism. That really is kind of the crux of
Yeah.
so many issues in our country and in the world. But you think about things like, you go to the island of Oahu. There used to be such a beautiful stewardship process called the Ahapua. And that went from the top of the mountain down to the ocean. And there was this
Mm.
whole beautiful system of, the gathering the rain, and then the rain would feed the plants, and then the plants
Mhm.
would then, provide nutrients for the fish, and then the fish would feed the people. And there was just this cycle of stewardship, that sense of community. Um, Everybody had a role, and everybody, knew how to take care of one another.
Yeah.
You look now, one of the biggest tourist areas in Oahu is in Waikiki. That was an original ahopua that was filled in. There's a much longer story there, but that was filled in, not by choice, by force,
Wow.
and is now some of the most expensive properties
Right.
in the United States. So yeah, losing that sense of connectivity to each other, losing the connectivity to our responsibilities to the earth, to the creations on earth. And,
Yeah.
in I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but in my traditional way of dress, we have our moccasins, and each piece of our moccasins represents something.
Wow.
The sole of the moccasins represents Mother Earth, and there's a uh, red. The top of it is red, and that represents all the creations on Earth. And then
Wow.
the buckskin wraps that are around the top, that represents, I believe it represents Father Sky. And so it's just all encompassing, just reminders of your community,
Mm.
reminders of where your responsibilities are, reminders that you've got these things that are beyond you that you need to take
Yeah.
care of.
Yes.
And sometimes, we only take care of other people, and we don't take care of ourselves. And I think
Right.
that's one of the
Especially
things that is,
moms.
yes, that's definitely a something that we need to remind ourselves as well. And then where in our healing, can we bring ourselves back to ourselves? I think in our first conversation that we had, I was
Yeah.
talking about, I may have said this, my therapist, when I'm in a moment of crisis, is always saying, well, where are you with your spirituality? Like, how in touch are you with your
Yes.
spirituality? And then I'm like, oh my goodness, wait a minute. And
You're
I
like, it's
believe the
totally
end.
gone. It's gone.
Yes, like
Can't find it.
I have just not taken care of myself. Like
Right.
running is in my culture is prayer. And so
Wait, did you say
I just,
running is prayer? Did you say that?
mhm. Yeah,
Oh my God.
it's a
I
part
love,
of,
I got chills from that.
yeah, it is a way that we connect with ourselves, connect with just the elements and the earth. And
Oh,
yeah.
I've got to interrupt you on the, okay. So I never knew this, and this is why I have met you. Like, now it all makes sense. I started running a bunch of years ago, but only I think I had told you I had felt like the energy of the earth, like the vibration of the earth. Like I started to feel like earth was like speaking to me, like we were connected, and you were like, I get that. I'm like, I'm so glad you got that, because like you could say that to other people and they're like, oh, you're crazy. But it happened during running. Like that like I cultivated it more and more in meditation and just sitting with trees and things, but like it started when running that I would, for some reason, right away feel the core of the earth. Like I would go right to the core of the earth and I would feel like an energy coming up through the earth into me that powered me. And like only later on did I learn like that was called running energies because like you could sit in meditation and get it from below and from above and that's how you clear your energy field and receive information and that's a whole other podcast we could do but like but it's so funny because just today I was thinking about how when I was running, that was how I learned to run energies. And I was just thinking of like, why is that? And you just like said it. It's prayer. It's
Mhm.
considered prayer. Like, how powerful would it be if everyone knew that when they were running, they could actually open themselves up to something greater than them that's so healing and powerful and connective with not just earth, but with all people.
Mm,
Like, I'm
yeah.
just like,
It's such a powerful, like, it's
wow.
it seems like such a simple concept, but it's so powerful, and running is a part of a lot of our traditional ceremonies.
Wow.
Um, and I have a friend of mine who she's a runner, and I remember every time I would see her, instead of saying "How are you," she'd say, "How is your running going?" or "How is your running?" Because she knew that that was something, I know that it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And she knew that that was something that just was so central to who I am. And I know I'm out of whack if I haven't been running. I
Right.
know that absolutely.
Right.
But sometimes I just kind of sit and I say, I'm just waiting for my running to come back to me. But there are things that I have to do, in order
Yeah.
to do that. But yeah, there's, part of our coming of age ceremony is we run in the morning before the sun comes up as far as we can. And
Wow.
we're joined, we don't run by ourselves. We're joined by the people around us, our loved ones, other women in our families or other women who are central to our upbringing. Um,
This is like the most
yeah,
beautiful thing I've ever heard.
one
This,
of the
oh my
coolest
God.
stories, one of the coolest, most powerful stories about running is if you read about the Pueblo Revolt in New Mexico. There is, and I can't, speak so much for our Pueblo communities, but if you, they're one of the main the overarching story is that the Pueblo people were able to gather together. So there's 19 Pueblo communities now in New Mexico. And at that time, when the conquistadors were coming into what's now known as New Mexico in the Southwest, with so much destruction and just chaos and, horrible, horrible things that they, were doing with our communities, to our communities, the Pueblo people were able to band together and push the Spaniards and the conquistadors out of New Mexico. And the way they were able to do that was there was a runner that went from every one community, their community's runner, and they carried a rope with them, and there was a rope started off with one knot in it, and that's how the message was delivered from one community to the next, and then their runner took the rope, tied the knot in it, took it to the next community, and that's how the message was passed, and that's how everybody knew, like, we're all in, we're doing this, and they were able to successfully push the Spaniards out of New Mexico. And so it has a
Wow.
more than just a cultural significance, like it's
Yeah.
a role within our communities as
Wow.
well.
I
So the
love all that you just said. Like it's just even just down to like the unity behind that story, and the power and the courage and everyone having their own role that is kind of like their piece of the puzzle, where everyone feels like they fit in some way, even though they might be different. Like every piece, is not the same. And I always say that like co-creating a new earth is really just all about putting together the pieces of the puzzle because like we don't like there's not one person who has like all the answers that knows like every single thing and that's why like we have to elevate these stories. We have to elevate this kind of wisdom. We all have to come in and snap in like our piece of the puzzle, because that creates the rich tapestry of the kind of earth that we are worthy of really enjoying. And so for that, I'll ask you, if you had to say like what a vision of the new earth would be for you, what does that look and feel like, being able to honor where you've come from to be able to create really where you want to go?
Yeah, I think it is. There's a couple of parts to this, and I'll say it is one, we trust each other.
Mm,
Um, we know also where to lean in and how to lean in, but we also know how and when to step back.
right.
And we just kind of know our place. And I think that really does come from trust. From my perspective as an Indigenous person in the work that I do now, it just really is getting back to our humanity
Yes.
and caring about one another because, right now there are so many people who are struggling and
Mhm.
suffering. Um, and there's so much destruction going on right now, but it's easy to live in your privilege to say, but that's not, impacting me right now, and kind of turn away from that. And this is where it's, important to understand where to lean in. But
Yes.
then there are times when, you do have to take care of yourself, and you do need to take care of your own well-being and your mental health, and take care of your family, and understand where you can lean in and where you need to step back. And
Right.
so, we had a conversation earlier about um oh, it just escaped me, but we said something earlier about
Bit like getting
oh
back to your spirituality.
no, I just totally lost it. But and this is what, oh, so, with all of the things going on in the world right now, I have a good friend who she's been saying a lot, this is not my lesson to learn,
Mhm.
whereas there are so many things going on right now, and we can be angry about it. We can be, heartbroken by it. We can, all of these things,
Right.
but having the ability to say, okay, just things are how they are. I don't have any control over it. So how am I going to let this show up in my mental health? How much of
Mm,
my energy do I need to give to this?
right.
Because we can be angry at, certain people for the way they voted, and like, oh, look at how you're
Oh
having to
yeah.
deal with it now. But it's kind of
Yeah.
like, but that isn't my lesson to learn. It isn't
Right.
my lesson to learn.
Right.
And so just picking and choosing where you put your energy. But yeah, it really is just trusting one another, which is difficult to do, but also trusting yourself
Yeah.
is really
Yeah.
important. And understanding that I'll tell you one thing that ties back to, and I know you wanted to talk about this, the word Hojonago.
Yes. Yeah.
And yes, so I always the story behind this is it's rooted in the Dene word Hojo. And Hojo is something that it's kind of lost in translation, but essentially it is the balance and harmony of everything and how it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
Um, and when I talked about that calendar of events and the things that we
Yeah.
do certain
Yeah.
times of year, our responsibility as Navajo people is like we don't do things outside of seasons that they're, so we have during the winter time, like right now, it's storytelling season. We play shoe game, like we have these certain things that we do during certain seasons. You do them outside of those seasons, it's very powerful, and can knock things out of balance in the universe, not
Yeah.
just within your own
Yes.
life and your own energy, but
Yes. Because
universally.
everything has an effect. Yeah. Wow. Wow. I
Yeah,
love that yes, of course it makes sense that now would be storytelling time. And how like beautiful is that?
yeah. So the word hojo is just basically that sense of balance and harmony and beauty, not in like a physical sense, but the beauty that there is in taking care of kind of what you're supposed to take care of, like especially, the beauty that we are blessed with here on this planet.
Yes.
And so for my company and for my nonprofit, I'm telling you, I did not have one other word that popped into my mind but Hojonago. And
Mm,
Hojonago is more of like an action. And what it means is the way that and how I was taught is that the way that you live your life in this present day should be one that honors the people who came before, so your ancestors, and it paves a good path for those who are coming after you. So it creates, there's that connectivity to the past and to the future, and that regardless of timeline, you have a part in it today. And
yeah.
so, I think that through my work and through the way that I try to live my life, that is my mission in all facets of life, is that whatever I'm doing today, it matters. And I need to do it in a way that is honorable, and do it in a way that, my ancestors, died for me to just even be alive today. So
Right.
it needs to honor that, and it needs to pave a good path, not just for my kids, but for all children.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. That is exactly why we're all here. Like I wish everyone would be able to hear what you just said, because everyone has a deep rooted history that they come from, that it's so important that they allow themselves to go back and understand what it is and what they can learn from it, and what they can carry through, because that again is what creates kind of that rich tapestry of the puzzle pieces that we're putting together for our future ancestors, for all of the children that are yet to be born. And I'll ask you one final question, if you're okay with it, if you're okay on time, because we've got to talk about the women.
Yes,
Can't not bring them
absolutely.
up. Especially with you don't see many Indigenous women in positions of power or leadership. Um, why is that? What can we do going forward, to pave the way to create bigger conversation around that? And and it's kind of twofold, because I look at one of the crazier things that was also outlawed is homeopathy, like
Mm.
natural plant remedies. Outlawed
Mhm.
because they work, right, in place for pharmaceutical, which is like a whole other conversation. But the homeopath that I had spoken to said it was the wise woman, and usually an indigenous woman that was like a great grandma that like passed down all of this kind of healing knowledge that came from the earth, that so few of us know. And I feel like if we could double down on being able to empower Indigenous women to take leadership roles, and at the same time also disseminate what it is that they remember or know, from that kind of earthly healing wisdom, we can really catapult, our whole world into that new earth way of being.
Mm. Yeah, I think, one of the people, my husband and I were just discussing her this morning, was Deb Holland. She's also a UNM School of Law alum, and she's from the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico as well. So
Mhm.
similar stories. And she was the very, very first Indigenous woman to serve as the Secretary of the Interior.
Oh, wow.
And the Department of Interior oversees the Bureau of Indian Affairs and oversees, Bureau of Land Management and all of these, all of these departments that are in charge of earth stewardship, so to speak.
Right. In
But
quotes, in air quotes.
yes, yes,
Right. Oh, look at that.
definitely. Oh,
I love it when that
yes,
happens. I say the universe agrees.
yes, absolutely. So there's some grumblings that I'm hearing about. She's possibly considering running for the governor of New Mexico. So we shall see.
Oh, that would
But
be amazing.
yeah, I think that there are a lot of, I think it depends on how you define power. I
Mm,
think it's from my perspective, there are a lot of Native women out there doing incredible things. Um, you know, they are strong voices for our communities. They are, on the front lines, fighting for our communities, fighting for the earth. A lot of folks call them activists.
Yeah.
But there are some really strong women who are at the front lines of those causes. There are a lot of women who are really leading grassroots efforts from our communities to speak, to elevate our voices from a grassroots level. There are a lot of women who are, in what I would say positions of power, but it just again depends on what, your definition of power is. But we understand that in order to, like, I think my husband was asking this morning, we were talking about what did Deb Haaland, accomplish in her time as Secretary of the Interior, and there were a lot of, sacred site protections. There were, a lot of strides that she made in kind of going back to the Indigenous ways. And, there were investments in Indian country that we have never seen before. And
Wow.
so we know that there are those traditional kind of Western positions of power that we do need to be in because our voices do matter.
Right.
And I think it really is one of one of the things that the Hozingo Institute, one of our areas of programming, is supporting Native women in accessing the workforce through remote careers. So it's really
Mm.
investing in women to be able to, unlock their own power.
Mm.
And we always say, Native women, we don't need capacity building. We need an opportunity. So providing opportunities for Native women to really be empowered, unlock their own power, and stand in that power is really important. So that comes through, supporting their wellness and mental health, especially
Right.
because there is generational trauma that comes along with,
Mm.
our histories. Um, Native women are essential to Native economies. So, supporting Native women, small businesses,
Mm.
supporting Native women in workforce development is really important. Um, so I think again, it's definition of power, but we do know that we need to be in those spaces and we can get there, we can be there. It just takes our community and takes, folks and our allies, really helping us to get there
Yeah.
in a number of different ways.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I mean, we could just talk forever. Like a thousand more questions I could ask you, but it's that generational trauma that I feel like we've got to heal it, and
Mm,
this is the way, just starting to have these kinds of conversations where we can get really honest about, what Indigenous people are experiencing and carrying around with them, for years. I mean, it's really been years because we cannot expect peace, I think, anywhere in the world if we don't have that kind of recognition for what's happened in our own country.
hmm
Like it just
Absolutely.
like it just it like to me it just it doesn't compute, and because like we're all people. Like we can't
Yeah.
just say, oh no, we've done it right, watch us, because we haven't.
Yeah. And I think, different folks have different ways of healing and different folks need different things.
Mm,
And so, it was really monumental when President Biden issued an apology to Indigenous communities, and that was powerful. But there also has to be action,
yes,
you know.
behind that.
Um, so it's making sure that we acknowledge the past harms, but okay, we're standing in the present. What are we going to do about
What
it
do we do
now?
about it now? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to make a plan with you. I honestly, like, and I think what you said before, it's so true. Like, it's not about women in a leadership role. It's about empowering every single individual woman to create, their own form of leadership for themselves.
Mm,
because to build, this new way of being, and it's also what you said before, like it comes down to the balance of like, this is like an individual evolution that we're living through that will
mhm.
create, a collective healing, and that's kind of like the beginning steps. And I know I keep saying one final question, but this really has to be, I have to ask one more. I'm so sorry. But like, what do we do like at the community level? Like this conversation started when I told you, like I had heard, I can't believe this, that the largest ancient burial ground in the Northeast corridor is in Staten Island. It's on the southern tip of Staten Island, where folks were living there for 8,000 years, that it's still not recognized, even though it was figured out like a year ago. A study was put out a year ago on it. There's no monument. There's no statue, there's no plaque. I hike there all the time. I told you I could feel the energy there being so grounding and different. I never understood why. And it was because everyone is buried there.
Mm,
And that is sacred. That is a sacred
mm,
land. And no one knows that unless I just run into someone while I'm hiking there and I make them know it.
mm. Yeah,
What do we do at the community level?
I think it really is asking, the descendants of the Lenape people what they want,
Mm,
because that's honoring their voice. And, um, it could be that they don't want a monument, or maybe they do. I think
right.
it really is going back to those descendants and asking them what they want,
Yeah.
and honoring that, whatever it may be. Um, and I think it's also in every individual asking yourself, how do I feel like I can um, make this right in my own way?
Yes. Yes.
Is that supporting Indigenous organizations? Is it,
Mm,
maybe I'm there and, I am honoring that community, honoring this land in my own personal way.
yes.
But also just recognizing, that we are on native land
Yes.
always, no
Yes.
matter where we
Always.
are.
Always. At
Yeah.
like at all times, like to always remember that we're always on native land. Like if we all could just remember that, just that piece in and of itself brings us so much further along.
Hmm.
It's been such an honor to interview you. I really cannot thank you enough. I would love to talk. Let's
Well,
keep
it's
it
been
going
really,
another time.
yeah, it's been really fun to kind of, talk about my life and my experiences and things that really matter to me. And so
Yes.
thank you for making this space and for caring.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's such an honor. How can folks find you? I'm gonna put links in the description, but I know you have a nonprofit if folks want to be able to donate. Folks can also vote for you, all that good stuff.
Yes, so my company is called Hozigo Consulting. We can be found at www.hozigo.com. My nonprofit is the Hozigo Institute. We are at hozigoinstitute.org. And for our tech product that we're building that's launching in March, you can find us at tribalfunding.org. And yes, I would love for folks to cast their vote for me for the Entrepreneur of Impact. I think it would be incredible to have an Indigenous woman entrepreneur featured in Forbes,
You deserve it.
because thank you,
Yes, you
thank
deserve it.
you.
You should wear your crown in the picture.
I only got to keep one crown. That was my Miss New Mexico USA crown. Yeah, but I have my other sashes, and
Okay.
yeah. So otherwise I'd be, and I understand, because otherwise I would be wearing them around this house. If I wasn't wearing them, my
Yeah,
daughter would be.
right,
She's,
of course,
yeah.
of course. Yeah. Wow.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
so that's where you can find me. And yeah, again, just really appreciate the time and the space. And yeah, I would love another opportunity to keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You're such a beautiful person, inside and out, really. And this has been so fun.